and when it comes, okay?
Okay.
Because we cannot put down everything, and that's the problem. Huh. So now we will go on to UI policies, UI action, okay, and scripting. So basically, these are the things that we use in ServiceNow to control the entire system. To control the entire system, as in whatever we want to do in the system, we can do it via these things. So basically, there are two type of scripting. First is a client script, and second is a server-side script. Do you have any knowledge or do you know the difference between a client and a server-side scripting?
Yes, I do have an idea. Yes.
Hello,
Yeah. Yes, Pratul, I have an idea.
hello.
Hello, Pratul, can you hear me?
Some problem today.
Okay.
Some no problem. These things will happen. More specifically when you are when I'm in India, where it's bound to happen. All these things. The
Okay.
connectivity is really strong over here, right? So what
Yeah.
I was saying is, there are basically two types of scripting. One is a client-side script, and the other one is a server-side script. Do you know the
Okay.
difference between the client-side script and the server-side script?
I have an idea about the client and server scripts, but not
Uh,
completely.
okay, see, we need to first understand like what is the basic difference between a client-side coding and a server-side coding. What I mean to say, we need to understand how and when it is working. Like suppose to give you an example, suppose if I go onto the incident form, let's take example from ServiceNow itself. Excuse me. No, there is nothing is mandatory over here. Let's do one thing. Let's make something mandatory. Let's what happened? Okay, right click. You're there, right, Shrikant?
Yeah, I'm there, Pratul.
It was showing me a pop-up, your connection has been lost. That is why. Okay, what I'll
Okay.
do is I'll make it mandatory and I'll update it. Now we see that this order is mandatory. Now what I do is I'll try to submit my form. If I submit my form, it says the following mandatory fields are not filled. Order. Okay. So now what is happening is we are on a web browser, right? And
Hmm.
what we are doing is these mandatory validations are done on the browser level itself. Like
Okay.
my client means to say the browser. This is a thin client, right? The
Yeah.
browser is doing this validation. So client-side validation means the validations that the browser itself is doing. Like suppose if I tell that this validation, suppose if I say that the order validation, order should be mandatory, right?
Hmm.
That's what I'm doing. Now if I say that this validation is done on the server, so what will happen in that case is I will not fill in the order and I'll be able to submit the form. And the data will go onto the server. Then it will get validated on the server and the server will tell me, boss, you have not filled an order, and there will be error message that will be coming back. So that will be a unnecessary transaction because
Okay.
on the client itself we know that the order is mandatory. So let's put some rules on the client itself so that we cannot even go to the server until unless we put the values for order. That is
Okay.
the meaning of a client side validation. That you are
Hmm.
doing, your server itself is doing the validation. Not your server, sorry. Your client itself is doing the validation. That is the web browser is doing those validations.
Okay.
Contrary to that, server-side validation is something that is getting validated on the server. Like suppose if some website is asking for our bank details, okay. So we put in our bank details, but the client or our browser will not know whether we are putting the right details or not. So in that
Hmm.
case, what will happen? The details will go to the server. It will get validated over here. If it is validated, it will go through. If not, it will get an error message that your details are not correct. So those
Okay.
validations are happening on the server. So this is the major difference between a server-side validation and a client-side validation. The client-side validation happens on our system, on our browser, on our end itself. But the
Hmm.
server-side validation is happening on the server. This is very important to understand because then only we'll get to know like or down the line we'll have to analyze, like suppose this is the requirement, then how do I need to proceed on this? Do I have to write a
Mhm.
client-side script, or do I have to write a server-side script? Do I have to write a business? Do I have to write a UI policy? So we need to understand that.
Okay. Prathul, can you give another example of server-side script?
We'll take a number of examples of server-side scripts.
Okay.
Okay. I was just giving you the difference between a client script and a client-side scripting and server-side scripting. Like
Okay.
how those two are different basically. How those two work. Or else if you want a better example of a server-side code, let's take up an example. I don't have something at the back of my head.
Okay.
What I will do is we'll start off with UI policy. Okay. First of all, the first level of validation on the first I'll take up client-side validation. Okay. The
Hmm.
first level of validation that happens on the client side that we have already seen, like the first level of configuration, as you can right click over here, you can go into configure dictionary, and
Mhm.
you can choose these three options. You can make it read only, you can make it mandatory, you can make it display, means if either it will be displayed or it will be hidden. So these are
Okay.
the first three validations that we can do on the dictionary. Now, if we are doing anything on the dictionary, suppose if I check this mandatory on the dictionary, this field will always be mandatory. This field will always be mandatory, irrespective
Okay.
of whatever I am doing. Right?
Okay.
Like it is not conditional mandatory. Like you are not putting any condition to make it mandatory. What you are telling was that this field urgency will always be mandatory.
Okay.
And there is one more important thing that we have to note down over here. If you see this, what I did is I went into incident. I opened an existing incident. Then I went on to this field called urgency. I right clicked and went on to configure dictionary. But now if you see this form shows that the table is task, but
Okay.
we went to this field from the incident table. Now this is because incident table is inherited from the task table, and
Okay.
field urgency is basically coming from the task table and it is getting used in the incident table. So this
Hmm.
field is not basically a field of the incident table, but this field is basically a field of the task table. So if you make this field mandatory, this will become mandatory on the task level. And
Okay.
wherever this field is used, because incident is inheriting the task table, there are many other tables which might be inheriting the task table, and they might be using this urgency field. So it will become mandatory in all those forms.
Okay.
That is why when we are doing something on the dictionary level, we should make sure that it will not impact other things. Because let's see, let's see if there's an urgency field on the change form. Urgency is not there. What we'll do is we'll put on urgency.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
put urgency over here, put it on the top so that we'll know where it is. Okay, now urgency is here. It is not mandatory, but what I will do is I'll make it mandatory and I will save this page.
Okay.
What I'm doing is I'm making urgency mandatory on the task level. But if you go here and if you reload this page, see this urgency has become mandatory over here as well.
Yeah.
You know the meaning of these symbols and the colors.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
See,
aware.
basically red means a mandatory field.
Mandatory. Yes.
The star is coming only for mandatory fields. Okay, so when we make something mandatory on the dictionary level, it will impact other things as well. So you should refrain from making these things, changing these things on the dictionary level. Okay,
Okay.
now let's go on to UI policies.
So UI policies comes under client scripts, right?
Yeah, this is client-side validation.
Okay.
UI policy is also client-side validation. See, uh, UI policy and client script are client-side validation. Data
Hmm.
policy is a server-side validation, but data policy also works differently. We'll talk about data policy. Business rule is a typical server-side code.
Okay.
Okay. Client script and UI policies are typical client-side code. Data policy is also a server-side code, but it works differently. I will tell you for
Okay.
data policy. And business rule is a typical server-side code. In UI
Okay.
action, you can write both server-side and client-side code that we will talk about. That is a bit advanced, but we'll talk about that. And in schedule job also you have to write you have to write server-side code as well. We'll
Okay.
talk about all these things. Let's take it up on one by one basis.
Okay.
Now the first thing is we'll have to understand why do we write a UI policy. Okay, so the main purpose of UI, there are three main purposes of a UI policy. You can make something read only, you can make something mandatory, or you can control the visibility of a field. These are the three main things that we do via UI policy. You can do other things also, but this is the main motto of a UI policy. So let's do one thing. Let's open one of the incident form. Let's open one of the incident form. Now what we will do is we will just write a plain UI policy first, then I will write condition based UI policy. Let's close this tab, it's not required. Okay, now what I'll do is I click on new. Let's see what is there in UI policies. Okay, now the first thing on a UI policy is table. So we'll have to specify on which table do we want to write this UI policy. So as of now we are doing it on the incident table. See, now the difference comes when you are writing a UI policy only on the incident table. So if you are making something mandatory, suppose if you are making the urgency field which is on the task level mandatory via UI policy, but this UI policy is running on only on the incident table. It is not running on other tables, so it will not impact the other tables. Okay, so this is the table name. Application scope is global, active is true. Short description, let's put any short description. Make a field read only. Let's put any description, any short description of this. See, there is another field called order. Order is basically, suppose if you have two UI policies on the same field. Okay, so the one with the higher order will take precedence. Will take precedence as in everything will get executed, but it will get executed in order. Okay, suppose if you have written two UI policies, so the one with the lower order will get executed first and one with the higher order will get executed afterwards. There is
Okay.
not much significance of order in UI policy. Order is basically significant in business rule that I will tell you when we will cover business rule. Order is there, you can use this order, but that is not very much significant. Might be used sometimes, but I have not come across a scenario where we use order in UI policy because it's not required. Okay. So we keep the order as it is. Now it says there is a tab called when to apply. It says when do you want this UI policies to run. So what we'll do is as of now I will not give any condition over here. Okay. Now there's a global checkbox if you want to check this. Okay. I will tell you about this global checkbox when we see client script. Okay. Apply the UI policy action when okay. So when it says that do you want to apply this for the UI policy when the form is loading as well. Okay. Normally if you uncheck this, it will not be applicable when the form is loading for the first time. But if you check this, when we'll see how it works, you will understand and you'll be able to map what is happening. So when you check it, it says that it will work even when the form is loading. Now there is an option called reverse is false. Let me tell you what reverse is false is there. And table that extends the specific table inherits the UI policy. See, there is an important checkbox called inherit. Okay, so what I told you initially when we were talking about inheritance and we were talking about extending tables and all, I
Hmm.
told the structure and the rules that are written for the parent table are applicable for the child table as well. Okay,
Yes.
so we have option. See, if you read this, it says table that extend the specified table inherits this UI policy. That means
Hmm.
suppose if I've written any UI policy on the task table, and
Hmm.
when in that UI policy I have checked this inherit checkbox, so those UI policies will be applicable to the incident table as well. Now
Okay.
suppose when I'm writing this UI policy, and I check this inherit. So if further on, if I extend, though I cannot extend any table from the incident table that we saw, that incident table is not extendable, but still, if we are extending anything from the incident table, then this UI policy will be applicable on that extended table as well. Okay,
Okay. Yeah.
this is
Okay.
very important to understand. What I will do is now I'll just save this one. Excuse me, I'm going through a cold.
Okay.
Okay, now these things are done. Now we'll see after saving there is something new has come in, because till now we say that we have defined what is the table, like what is for description. It gives us an option when to apply. It did not ask me what it has to do, right? So after saving this, there is another related list that pops in. Now suppose if I, this is called as UI policy action. What action do you want to take on this? Now UI policy name is auto-populated, table is auto-populated. Now it wants to say that which field do you want to change, or which field do you want to take action on. Let's select the same field that we did, or else we can take any field. Let's take this field urgency. Okay, so I've selected this field. Now I will say you make it read only. Read only is true. Okay, now what I'll do
Okay.
is I'll do this. Okay, let's go back. We say that we have made urgency is, see, we can do three things: mandatory, visible, and read only. We have mandatory and visible leave alone, that we are not doing anything, like we are not making it mandatory or non-mandatory, and we are not hiding it. But we are telling that it should be read only. Now what I will do is I will go to my. I see that urgency is not read only, right? We can edit urgency.
Yeah.
Now what I will do is I will reload my form. Oh, it does not become read only. I can say read only is true. One second. I think it is conflicting somewhere. Let's try to change this field name. No, I cannot change it from here. Let's go back to this. There are multiple UI policies with the same order for this field. This order is not predictable. I think there is something else which is written on the UI on the urgency field. So that will impact because of the order. Suppose if I write two UI policies on the same field with the same
Okay.
order. So
Mm-hmm.
suppose I'm in one UI policy I'm telling you make this mandatory, and in the other one I'm telling you remove the mandatory. So that will conflict, right? So there might be
Yeah.
something which is conflicting. Let's put in short description and update it. No, this is not working. What's the problem? Let me see one second. Incident global short description read only. Sometimes we face these issues. The simplest of things does not work out. No, now it has become mandatory. Okay, read only. I think I cannot make it read only. Okay. See, now I made short description mandatory. So it is,
Hmm.
see, there are few things that we'll have to keep in mind. Few things very logical. Like suppose if I try to make one field mandatory and read only both, this is also from much experience. But if I try to make a field mandatory and read only both, what I'm saying is this field is read, suppose, and that field is not having any value. So what I'm telling that this field is read only. Read only means you cannot edit that field, and it is
Yeah.
mandatory. So the system will say, "Was this is not logically correct, right? You
Yeah.
cannot say that something is read only, that you cannot put in values, and you say it is mandatory." So if those things can conflict sometimes, but it will work normally. So what we
Mm-hmm.
have, we have made short description mandatory. Now we did not put any condition into it, right?
Yeah.
Now suppose we want to put some condition on top of it. Few things are there which we have missing because of the condition. Suppose if I say that do it only if the caller is system administrator. I say that you have to do it only when the caller is system
System.
administrator.